This is Pete Wenners from Table Rock Tips from the Pros, and I've got a special guest today. It's my buddy Brian Snowden, six-time BassMaster qualifier. And, you know, Brian's full-time touring pro on the Elite Series, guides here on Table Rock, fished a number of tournaments in this area for the last 20 years or so. And we're going to pick Brian's brain about one of his favorite patterns, how to fish the post spawn on Table Rock. Brian, thanks for giving up your time and doing this for us and the people out there.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Pete.
I know in the post spawn, that's the time of year where a lot of guys start to head up to like the James River and Long Creek and start fishing Carolina rigs, football jigs off the drop-offs. And I know you kind of like to hang in the mid-section of the lake, you know, stay out of the river arms. Is there a certain time of the year in there that it seems to be best for you?
Well, you know, it seems like the whole month of June and part of July can be really good. And one of the reasons why I stay in the midsection is just due to pressure. I found some ways to use deep crankbaits along with football jigs to catch fish on structure that a lot of people miss, I think. And, it's helped me put some nice fish in the boat when I didn't have to make those long runs up the rivers. And, it's my favorite time because when you find those fish, you can usually catch 3 or 4 good ones off of one piece of structure or point, and then you can move on to the next one. So you get to cover some water, you get to power fish with big crankbaits, and there's a few things I like to do that you can get those baits even deeper than normal. And now with some of the technology and some of the new baits they came out with, you can fish a crankbait all the way down 35, 40 feet. So we can get the bait where we need to get it in that post-spawn conditions, even on those deep, clear reservoirs like Table Rock.
Before we get into the structure that you like to key on, Brian, what type of crankbait you're throwing, and talk a little bit about the rod and the line size that you like to use.
Well, most people complain about deep cranking, and one of the complaints they have is it really tires out their arms. One of the things you really need to do is invest in a rod just for deep cranking. This is a St. Croix, it's a Legend tournament, but it's called the Magnum Crankbait Rod. It is a 710, it's got a long handle, and this is what I like about it, is the handle fits all the way down your forearm. So this allows you to rest it in between your forearm and your ribs. Takes a lot of the pressure of these deep crankbaits off of your wrist, so you can throw these baits all day long. And this is just a Johnny Morris reel. I like to use it. It's got plenty of line capacity for some of the techniques we're going to use later in the year, more towards July. But this rod allows you to throw baits just like the 6XD and larger, long distances to get maximum depth if you're casting to the targets. And it won't fatigue you after cranking these all day long. And where I fish, the water tends to be relatively clear, so this rod is real important to me because I'm going to be cranking extremely fast to get those fish to react to these baits due to the clear water. And this rod and reel combination allows me to do that all day long without a lot of fatigue on my wrist and forearm.
What about your reel ratio, Ryan?
I've really come to the conclusion that I just like the standard
6'4" or
6'2".
Yeah.
And I use all the same reels that way. If I have something happen to one, I can switch off. And if it's wintertime and I have to fish the bait slow, I just mentally slow down my retreat. Same thing in the springtime or summertime when it gets where you want to move it faster. So I'm going to use all the same 6'2" to 4". I believe this is the ratio on this. It's 6'4" to 1. I'm sorry, 6'4" to 1, and that's what I'm going to use. It's got plenty of power to move big fish, and it's fast enough that you won't have any trouble burning the bait all day long.
And I found that same thing. I used to get like say a 5'3" for some cranking, but then I might have that 5'3" on a rod that I'd want to throw something else on. Mm-hmm. So I found that running like a 6'2" or 6'4" all the time, you just have to discipline to slow yourself down on the crankbait sometimes.
Right, and that's usually only affected in early spring, late winter, that time of the year when you're going to have to really pay attention.
I see you've got a lot bigger crankbait here.
Yeah, we've got several. And like I say, the technology of these deep diving crankbaits, as you can see, this is like the standard that's been around for 20 years. It's going to run 16 to 19 feet on a cast. And it's going to cover that water column very effectively in those depths. But now, as technology has improved and baits have gotten better, we've got baits that are running on a cast. This one can run 25 feet. So now you can get a bait with a little bit bigger profile, but you can get a bait like this is the Z-Boss 25 by Azuma. One of the first baits I've actually caught a double 4.5 pounder, Lake Kentucky on.
I saw that on video on.
Yeah, it was a pretty
BassMaster.
exciting day. I just lost a 5 pounder, made another long line over this point, ended up with 2 4.5, so that was a good call for me. But this bait, each bait has a little bit different characteristics. This one's got a nice tight wobble, works exceptionally well in the clear water, and that's another reason why I like the Strike King baits in the clear water. They've got a medium to tight wobble. They just work exceptionally well in that clear water. If I'm going to get in a little more stain or off-colored water, something like the fat-free shad tends to work a little better. But as the bait technology has improved, we've got baits now that run anywhere, crankbaits, 1 foot all the way down to 25 feet on a cast. And another technique we'll use at Table Rock when it's later in June, when those fish start to move out deeper, is long line. And this will allow you to get a bait like this down to 40 feet, no problem. Even the standard bait like this, we can get into 30, 35 feet.
And you catch a little bit of everything. I know when you and I were fishing a tournament this summer, we had doubles on. You had a big walleye on, and I think I had a largemouth on.
And it's a bait that they haven't seen at that depth. Most of the guys are usually, when they're fishing that deep, are fishing in Carolina rig, drop shot, something of that nature. Where this, you can come in with a lot of speed into the target, like a brush pile that's out there deep, and it just triggers those fish a lot of times when they're inactive. And that's one of the things I like to do. And the best thing about long lining is you can get it to any depth you want, and you can target a specific area, and that's what we do with the long lining technique.
And now, what are you in the post on? What kind of structure are you targeting? Like in, say, early June, just right after the fish are done spawning, they start to move back out?
Well, when the fish first start to move out, I'm going to fish more shallow gravel areas, and I'm basically going to concentrate on points, long gravel points. And when they first get out there, they're either going to be on the gravel or they're going to be starting to suspend, and they're going to be more on those secondary points next to timber. And what I found is those fish move out of the spawning pockets either to the first gravel point or the first point with timber, and they'll suspend in that timber. Or
like a pole timber point?
Yeah, mainly pole timber. Some cedar trees. Cedar trees are a little more difficult to fish, but pole timber seems to be the best. And that's where the shallower running crankbaits such as the 6XD or the fat-free shad, where I really like to use them in the beginning of the year. And this bait will bounce off that wood, keep a nice medium steady retrieve as you bring it through there, and a lot of times you'll even catch fish with the boat out off, suspended off the bottom. So you don't necessarily have to be grinding the bottom the whole time, because a lot of those fish will suspend when you have those hard.
That's what I was just about ready to ask you. A lot of times you're targeting fish that aren't on the bottom, suspended in that timber.
Right.
Or around it.
And then later in the years, they move out a little further. That's where it becomes real important with the electronics and pinpointing those either brush piles or cedars or hardwoods that might top out at 20 feet, and you're going to try and get this bait to hit the top of those trees, even if the trees are 30, 40 feet deep.
Yeah, and most of the time in the pole timber, you can actually work your way through a lot of that. It doesn't have the branches like you just said. The cedar trees can be a little bit more difficult. What about your line size?
Most of the time I'm going to try and get away with a 12-pound line. Just remember, if you need to go deeper, you can go to 10. I don't recommend much lighter than 10 on a deep crankbait, just because the size, the long cast you're making, and the speed you're bringing it back. So I really like to use, I use XPS fluorocarbon. It's dense, it sinks in the water, so that allows you to get a little more depth. And I use the XPS KVD Signature Series fluorocarbon.
And you retrieve, you kind of mix up your retrieve, kind of let the fish tell you how they want it? Or?
Most of the time, as long as I'm hitting something, I do a steady retrieve, medium to medium fast. If I'm fishing open water like the gravel points, I'm going to do a lot more stop and go, just because my bait is not bouncing off of trees or brush piles or rock. So if it's not bouncing off of something, I'm always going to try and put a stop and go retrieve in there. But if it is bouncing off of objects, then I just kind of let the objects create the variation in
of
the
the bait action, but the bait bounce off it, kind of give it a little erratic action.
And one of the things people want to remember, they a lot of times when you're fishing crankbaits, they slow down when they hit something. And what happens, if you can take a picture of this bait, when you're bringing it in, it's at an angle just like this. So when it hits something, it's going to hit something with the bill first, and that, if you keep reeling, that keeps that bait at this position, and that keeps those hooks behind the lure. If you start pausing it, that lure raises up, you're going to have those hooks exposed more, you're going to get hung up much more. So one of the things that I tell people that just start crankbaiting is always continue that retrieve, even when you're going in and out of brush.
Out of the structure.
Because that's going to help you keep from getting hung up, catching more fish.
Brian, I mentioned earlier that you're in between being on the tour, that you're also still guiding on Table Rock. If people want to get a hold of you and book a trip, what's the best way for them to get in contact?
Well, we've just updated my site. It's all on briansnowden.com. There's a page that shows some of the clients that I've taken out, some of the fish we've caught, and there's a submission form. All you have to do is fill out your email address, what day you're looking for, and hit submit, and it'll come right to me, and I'll get back with you and see if I'm available during those days.
Well, that's great, Brian. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day. We wish you good luck in the tour this year.
Thank you.
And just good luck, good fishing, everyone.
All right, thank you.